But let's take this question from Nigel Matthews, please.
Should countries and people renege on their debt?
Greece, of course, you're referring to, yes?
Yeah.
Should countries and people renege on their debt? Peter Hain.
Well, not as a matter of principle, not ideally, but what Greece has been through is an austerity agenda which is simply disastrous. But what has actually happened since they've had this austerity imposed upon them by the European Union leadership with the blessing of our government? Debt has gone up. A third of their economy, a quarter of their economy has disappeared. Young people, half of young people are jobless. Middle-class professionals are relying on soup kitchens alongside redundant cleaners. They're destroying the society. The way you get change in a country like Greece or any society facing austerity is to invest in growth, get people into work so they pay taxes and the public revenues start to come into balance, as well as making efficiency savings and public spending cuts where you need to. What you don't do is pull the rug from underneath a society, and that is why Syriza won last Sunday, and frankly, I'm delighted they won, because they were standing up for people of Greece and saying we're not prepared to accept this failed austerity policy which is sweeping across the world.
Of course, your question was whether countries and people, and of course people can renege on debt, they can declare themselves bankrupt, can't they?
They can, but would Peter loan me £20,000 and I'll pay him 10p in the pound back?
No, but I'll tell you what we did do. We bailed out the banks by over £100 billion when they crashed due to their own irresponsible policies. Sometimes you have to do these things.
Take Maltby.
Should people or countries renege on their debt? No. That's the answer. Look, I understand why people in Greece have voted for Syriza. You know, and frankly, who amongst us wouldn't be tempted? You know, they've suffered hugely. The unemployment rate, people my age are unlikely to ever have had a job. People turn to extreme parties in this sort of chaos. But first of all, chaos for the Eurozone, obviously a problem for all of us. Financial instability, obviously a problem for all of us. But to talk further about extremism, I mean, if you actually look at these people, if you look at Syriza, the people they've gone into coalition with, the independent Greeks, you know, are very, very unpleasant people linked to anti-Semitism, linked to fascism. And you know, Peter, I know about your very valiant history as an anti-apartheid campaigner, but I'm frankly surprised that you are welcoming a coalition that includes these people. And frankly, a little saddened that you're doing so in when we've just marked Holocaust Memorial Day, because these things don't always happen when extremist parties come in, but they can.
Well, I'm not happy about that, but what I am happy about is the first decisions of the government: abolish charges for prescriptions, abolish charges for hospital care, give people back jobs that have been taken away from them and pensions, and to renegotiate their debt on a more sensible basis,
also
not to renege
on sanctions against Mr. Putin. That was one of their first actions as well, and that does serious damage to Great Britain's interests.
The biggest thing they should do, and the biggest thing the European establishment should respond to, is to renegotiate their debt conditions and their loan restructuring so that they get a more sensible, long-term, lower interest rate basis for paying back the debt. That's what they want.
The man in the pink shirt there.
The new Greek government are now saying they will not pay their debt. What I'd like to know is what is going to, if they renege on any of it or part of it, are other countries going to follow their idea? There are other countries struggling with the euro.
Germaine Greer.
Well, it's an interesting issue because, if I'm not mistaken, Europe has decided to go for quantitative easing. So it's going to print money. That's almost the same thing. They realise they have to prime the pump in the stagnant economies of the rest of Europe, and they're doing it, and they can do it. Now, countries have reneged before. Argentina, I seem to remember, reneged on a massive debt because they had to rebuild their economy, which is what they did and what they have done. They got away with it. But what people don't want you to realise is that you could get away with it. In the end, we come down to this big problem of whether money is real, whether the things we call value are really value, whether they're stable in any sense at all, or whether it's all a colossal con. If you actually look at what happened with the banks, they got away with it too, and they decided it was our debt. We hadn't had any of that money, but we've had to pay it back. Wait and see. If the Greeks get away with it, good luck to them, is all I can say.
Isn't it wrong, though, that the EU should impose such extreme austerity on Greece, when surely, when you started off on the euro, they should have looked into all this and seen what was potentially going to come further down the road and stopped it happening? What they actually did was they allowed Greece to get further and further into debt, and obviously they could have cheap debt because of being in part of the euro. Should they not have actually seen that coming and put the brakes on sooner?
Sajid, Javid, you have heard a lot of applause here for the idea that Greece should be allowed to just give up its debt.
Yeah, well, first of all, this is a desperate cry for help by the Greek people, and I understand that. I think everyone understands that. When you're in that kind of situation, you will look for any kind of alternative. To first answer the question, should they default? Only if you're prepared for things to get a lot worse before you have any chance of them getting any better. And I say that with some knowledge of this because in my previous life, one of my jobs was to help advise countries that were near default or had defaulted on their debt. And that's what happens if you do default, and countries have done it in the past. Things will get worse before you have any chance of them getting better. And you have to be ready for that.
Which countries were these?
A lot of Latin American countries borrowed too much money in the 1970s, and many of them eventually defaulted and then had to write off.
You said you were advising.
For some of them, it actually made sense. Ultimately, it made sense for them because things had got so bad that they were prepared and they realised that by taking that kind of really severe course of action, it could get better. But
does it make sense for Greece?
No, but in Greece, it's very different. The situation is very different. First of all, because the gentleman just mentioned the euro. The euro is a problem for Greece. The euro is a currency that's looking for a country. And until it finds that country, it's going to continue to cause problems for all its members. And that is what Governor Carney was referring to yesterday when he talked about in a country, if it was one country, if the Eurozone was one country, then rich parts would help poor parts. We're a currency union in the United Kingdom. That's what happens. And so that is part of the problem. But another part of the problem is its problem actually isn't really austerity. That's not the issue. See, austerity is really another word for saying you must live within your means. Everyone has to live within their means, and that includes countries. And when you don't live within your means, then things like this happen. Right. Your economy goes down, and that's what happens. Now, in the case of Britain, we've had to live within our means. Because we've done that over the last few years, we're moving towards a process where we will fully live within our means, and we've had some structural changes. We have one of the world's fastest growing economies. We have more people employed than any other time in our history.
Sajid, austerity is not about living within your means. On reneging on debt, we're not talking about total reneging on Greek debt anyway, but to answer the gentleman's point at the back, if you do get into credit card debt trouble, what you do is renegotiate. So it's quite right now that Greece should be able to renegotiate its debt. Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales, we're against austerity. We're looking forward to building an anti-austerity alliance after the election in May. We're glad to have Peter Hain on board now, and it's a shame he can't quite yet persuade the Labour Party, who have agreed to continue austerity into the next Parliament if they win the election. But nobody yet has mentioned the comments made by the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, yesterday, and what they mean for us here. What he is saying is that wealthy countries in Europe cannot continue to squeeze the poorest countries until they squeak. There are analogies for the UK. Yes, he says that things are different in the UK, but we cannot continue to have a position here where the wealthy parts of the UK, wealthy London, growing London, continues to squeeze us, whilst children here are living in poverty, whilst communities are having the life sucked out of them through austerity. What we need, the Conservatives had every right to have a go at austerity when they were in power in 2010. When you see that you're making a dreadful mistake, it's time to put your hands up, and now is the time for governments in the UK, whoever it might be after the May election, to say, we got it wrong, we've got to invest for the future.
Okay. The woman on the side there.
Where is this money to?
The woman here.
Hi. I would just like to know, really, if this is the beginning of the end for the Eurozone.
What's your view?
Yeah, things are crippling, and I'm glad that we've kept the pound and we're out of the euro.
Okay.
On a more local level, we've been talking about squeezing until the pips squeak. In this country, we're allowing big businesses to squeeze their small suppliers by making them wait 120 days before they get paid. Surely that's adding to austerity.
And you, sir, over there.
Well, the original question was put about countries and people, and everybody's gone on about countries, but what about the people? I'm in a local business down the road, and a lot of people don't care about the debt. I've got good customers that pay, but I've got customers that they run up a debt, they don't pay it, you phone them, they don't want to pay you, nothing you can do.
And do you think the same should be true of countries as you would like it to be of your customers?
People just don't have morals. Some people don't have morals or scruples.
And do you think governments don't have morals or scruples?
Well, there's no value to money anymore. Everything's done online, you hit the buttons, the money's disappear.
Okay, and one more point from you, sir, and then we'll move on. Yes.
I think the problem is that this is only just the start. I mean, if you look at Spain, for example, their elections are due in May, Podemos are starting to grow, because when people are being squeezed, as we say, they will vote for somebody who promises them that they won't be squeezed, they'll do something about it. The problem is that these countries don't do anything about it. I mean, I've lived in Spain for a few years, so I've got an example which I think is really interesting, which really shocked me, which is, if you want to be self-employed, and we all know that the backbone of a country is small businesses, so if you want to be self-employed, once you register to be self-employed, you have to pay effective national insurance of €260. It doesn't matter how much you earn. If you earn €10, you still have to pay it. Okay. And that's the sort of thing that needs to change in these countries. Okay. It needs proper thought-out things, but actually what's going to boost the economy.
Okay. I just want to pick up with Labour and Conservative, the point that Rhun made, which is the mood of expressed in Greece of an end to austerity, and he talked about the need to end austerity. Do you believe there's a need to end austerity? Do you believe there's a need to end austerity after the next election? Has Greece shown the way?
I don't know that Greece has shown the way because it's in a particularly dark hole, but we are in the wrong economic place, in my view. What happened at the beginning of this Parliament is when growth had just started to, in a small and hesitant way, occur under Labour when we left office. It was difficult bringing back from the global banking crisis, caused not by Labour spending too much in hospitals and schools and police, but actually actually bailing out the banks as we had to do, or we'd have all been on our backs. And, you know, $1 trillion was spent bailing out the banks. That's the root of this austerity. I think we should be going back to the principle that happened after the Second World War. This country was on its back. We had massive debts. Borrowing and the deficit was sky high. What did we do? We built the health service under a Labour government. We invested in jobs. When you get people into jobs, they start paying taxes. Right. Businesses start paying taxes. That's what we should be doing, and that's what Labour will do.
Sajid.
Well, we've already done what Peter has just said. The country's already been through that. That's what happened during 13 years of Labour government when Peter was part of that government. And what we saw was more borrowing, more spending, more debt.
That was caused by the
as a result, we had an economic crisis. We had the deepest recession in almost 100 years.
It was the banks,
1 million more people unemployed.
He didn't interrupt you. Let him speak.
Peter, I would like to finish, if I may. We've tried your way. We've tried your way of just spending. We also have to think how money is earned. And if we ignore that, then we will not achieve any of the goals that we want in terms of good public services. We've got a plan that's working for this country. If we abandon that plan, we'll go right back to 2010.
All right. I'm moving on. Kath Jones, please. A question from Kath Jones.
Coal mining historically made a significant contribution to Wrexham's economy. Wouldn't the development of our local shale gas reserves be a logical progression?
Wrexham used to have 38 pits, I think, and 12,000 people working in coal mining. So the question is, wouldn't shale gas reserves be a logical progression?